Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's jump right into it. January 1st, 2001 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Candidates for Wrestler of the Year. Sakuraba defeats another Gracie and more. By Dave Meltzer. For a year that, with the exception of the success of the WWF, was hardly a banner year for the business, there is actually no shortage of candidates for Wrestler of the Year. The Observer Awards balloting results will be announced here in 2 weeks, but beforehand, I wanted to run down a list of the top qualifiers with my own comments on them. Kurt Angle. Angle finished an incredible year as the WWF champion and arguably the most improved performer both in and out of the ring in the industry. It was only November of 1999 when Angle debuted on WWF television, playing the geeky 70s babyface role that is more of a heel today, with his only wrestling experience in Memphis where he was a strong rookie in the ring, but they actually often gave him a manager, Brandon Baxter, to do his interviews, which were considered a weakness. 1 year later, he's considered one of the top talkers in the game. He's already better in the ring than most of the WWF wrestlers, and if he improves at anywhere near the level in 2001, will be a challenger for the top in-ring performer in the business. Angle won almost every title in the WWF during the year as well as King of the Ring, although that was a disappointing show. He had many great matches, mainly with Rock and Chris Jericho. There are stronger candidates this year, but if one is to look into a crystal ball 1 year from now, barring injury, he may be the favorite for next year, since injuries may catch up with Triple H and Rock will be taking time off for film work. Chris Benoit. Many would concede him the title as the best in-ring performer in the business over the past year. His jump from WCW was one of the most important stories, in hindsight, of the year, because it killed the heart of the promotion. WCW would not have been a success with the people in charge and their ideas of how to run it had Benoit not jumped. But Benoit would have had numerous world title reigns in WCW and probably had great matches headlining many pay-per-view shows. If nothing else, there would have been a huge difference in WCW show quality, which probably would have kept the buy rates from falling as badly as they did, had he and the rest of the crew not went to WWF. However, in WWF, Benoit was never the man. He was the best high mid-card guy and the guy knocking on the door. But Angle, with his superior charisma and speaking ability, knocked harder and passed him on the food chain. Triple H, certainly from an American standpoint, everyone is practically conceding the award to him. He is a deserving winner, is the favorite, and the only question is whether or not he is the most deserving winner of several strong candidates. He was one of the 2 top guys in the top promotion in the world. The company had a banner year. He was tremendous inside the ring, putting together numerous Match of the Year candidates against several different opponents. He was a top draw both selling tickets, on pay-per-view, and for TV ratings, held the most important title in the business and the only title that means anything right now in the US on a couple of occasions. He had great programs with Mick Foley and Rock. He had a great build-up for what ultimately was a terribly disappointing program with Kurt Angle. The feud had incredible potential and how to make it work was obvious, but somehow the obvious was shut down, and to many people, the WWF's downturn since September can be pointed to the lame payoff, and people's reactions to Austin vs. Triple H, which drew the company's lowest pay-per-view of the year at Survivor Series, shows how the public took him being the mystery brains behind the running over Angle. WWF had the most successful year in its history, and he is certainly one of the 2 most valuable people in that year. He was the best political game player in the business over the past year. Whether you consider that a positive or a negative is a question, but playing good politics has always been a major part of success in the business. The big question is, even though everyone concedes him as the better wrestler and he had better matches and deserves to win, was he truly more valuable than Rock? Toshiaki Kawada. If you are going to list a most valuable wrestler to the promotion over the past year, Kawada would win hands down. Basically, there would be no All Japan Pro Wrestling today, except possibly as a tiny indie drawing 200 fans per show, had Kawada joined his former high school classmate in the big jump. If you took Rock or Triple H, or even both out of the mix, it would not make the difference in history that taking Kawada out of All Japan this year would have made. Kawada's staying was strong enough that the company was able to sell out 3 straight Budokan Hall shows with a skeleton crew, have the interpromotional feud with New Japan work well enough for a Tokyo Dome sellout and one of the biggest matches in the history of the Japanese business with Kensuke Sasaki on October 9th. His credentials to win are strong, particularly since in the ring as a worker he is better than Triple H and on par with Benoit, and that's with the limitations of his style of not being able to brawl outside the ring or break tables, and thus he has to do it in ring with wrestling moves. He carried a 50-year-old man, Tenryu, for a 4 stars match and made Sasaki look like the world champion New Japan has wanted him to look like for years, but never got him over as. Like Rock, Sakuraba, and Triple H, he has the credentials to win. The Kawada question is this: like an MVP in sports, the team that wins the World Series with 2 major superstars is invariably going to get one of them to win the MVP award over a .500 team that would be in last place without the contributions of its best player, even if that player meant more wins. WWF as a company was so much more successful than All Japan, which literally is struggling to survive. Kawada did give them a last shot in the arm, but long-term they are going to have a very tough year next year because the tag team tournament tour came off as a high-level indie. They don't have any network TV on the horizon, and after Jan. 28th with Tenryu at the Tokyo Dome, they have nothing left to draw big numbers unless they work more closely with New Japan. Mitsuharu Misawa, in the ring, aside from a Match of the Year candidate early on with Jun Akiyama, he didn't have the kind of year he's had in winning the award 3 times, including a close win over Steve Austin last year. However, Misawa was the catalyst in the split-up of the All Japan promotion and formation of Pro Wrestling Noah, which may ultimately be the most important news story of the year in Japan. I'd rate the destruction of WCW as the most important story for long-range repercussions. I'm not sure Misawa's influence on the year was greater than anyone in the business, with the possible exception of Rock, but this award isn't for the most influential wrestler outside the ring. Rock. In most normal years, Rock would be considered the odds-on favorite. He was the biggest draw in the industry, held the most important title on 2 occasions, and had a number of great matches on pay-per-view. Sometimes, because he's such a celebrity, being the first wrestler in history to make the People magazine listing of the 25 most intriguing people tend to discount his wrestling. He is not the in-ring performer Triple H is, but he's hardly a slouch and hardly a Hulk Hogan. This was his year. He was clearly the top draw, most charismatic, and carried the company. From a storyline standpoint and a match quality standpoint, Triple H was more valuable in that he had more great matches and carried more storylines. But the reason for the banner year was more Rock. When Steve Austin went down, the company should have hit a tailspin. It was not Triple H having great matches that kept it from happening. After the Triple H vs. Foley feud ran its course, and the drawing power in that was Foley and his retirement, from that point on, it was Rock who carried the show at the box office. If Rock was out of the picture, Triple H was strong enough of a performer and the WWF was hot enough as an entity that the company would have had a good year. If Triple H was out of the picture, Rock's charisma and drawing power would have carried the company to a better year than if Rock wasn't there. Rock sold more tickets. Another feather in Rock's cap is that Rock elevated far more wrestlers, which Triple H really didn't do. Triple H benefited by Foley's elevation, making him into a true world champion that everyone accepted as being arguably the best, but his first title loss was due to Austin as much as Rock winning, and his second. He didn't even lose the match, it was in a 6-man. Of course there was a screw job when Rock dropped the title, but he did so in the ring to Triple H and to Angle. While Triple H's pay-per-view numbers look better, it was the Foley rub early year. I don't think anyone can deny Rock as the biggest drawing card in wrestling for this year. The biggest pay-per-view draw of the 3 was Austin, who nobody is seriously considering because he was on the shelf most of the year, and it was because he wasn't around much that he was the biggest draw. From the standpoint that the company went up without Austin, what one person was the main reason why? The answer is Rock, not Triple H, thus making a strong argument he was the more valuable of the 2, and that is what this award is mainly about. Kazushi Sakuraba, probably the most intriguing candidate, particularly after he was voted by a 15-3 margin over Kawada in the balloting for Japanese MVP last week. First off, with Sakuraba, you have to answer the question as to whether or not he should be eligible. Those who follow Japanese wrestling closely will answer affirmatively without question, and can't even understand why there is any controversy here with the result. The fact he won answers it resoundingly. But an Observer Live poll on the subject saw 60% think he should not have even been eligible for the Japanese MVP award because of the belief he is not a pro wrestler. In our own awards descriptions over the past few years, there is no question, as it specifically states, the top award, Wrestler of the Year, is for overall excellence in whatever craft your company is presenting and value to the company over the past year. In another section it states performance and shoot matches can be taken into consideration for Wrestler of the Year, since that award encompasses the entire pro wrestling world. In the past, when UFC was much stronger on pay-per-view and more important to the world pro wrestling scene, UFC performers have been considered, with Ken Shamrock cracking the top 10 in 1995 and both Mark Coleman and Dan Severn in 1996. But it still becomes a hard comparison point. In some ways, Because Sakuraba actually had to beat his opponents to be a top guy in Top Draw, it makes him even more impressive. Not that the other guys have things handed to them, but if a company wants to go with them, it's a hell of an advantage. And his win streak against top guys all year, and his lone loss, says something. His match with Royce Gracie may be the most historically significant match of this year. In what he does, you can't work the kind of a schedule, and without pay-per-view in Japan being at the level of the US, he hasn't drawn the money a WWF star can put on the boards. His TV ratings for his big matches are higher than the WWF guys, but they do it weekly and he only has a few big matches during a year. The fact he drew what he did, got the awards that he did, and was a 185-pound guy makes it all the more remarkable. Really, Naoya Ogawa has drawn the biggest ratings draw of them all, but he's not getting any consideration. It's hard to believe there will be a year where someone will be so dominant in shoot matches and score so many high-profile wins and draw the gates in doing so that Sakuraba did. But it's so difficult to make a fair comparison of him with the other candidates. It comes down to the fact Pride had a banner year and wasn't anywhere near that strong a company until this year, and he was the most valuable in Pride's growth. Is taking a company that was never considered a major factor to where it became in many ways the number 2 company in the industry more valuable than being a breakthrough media star in the number 1 company, a great in-ring performer who drew huge money all year in the number 1 company, or being the man who saved from death and kept afloat a once strong company? All 4 have influence. All 4 have it in the ring. All 4 were valuable as hell to their companies. All 4 have strong credentials to win. Do you pick the guy with the match quality in the top company in so many strong pay-per-view main events who was a draw, or the top draw in the top company who also had many notable top matches, or the guy who without question was the most valuable to his smaller company who had many great matches, or the guy had by far the hardest road to travel and elevated a company? Sakuraba continued his mastery of the Gracie family with a decision win over an injured Ryan Gracie before a sellout of 26,882 fans, paying probably in the $3 million range for Pride 12 at the Saitama Super Arena in Tokugawa on December 23. One of the final major shows of the technical century pretty well harkened back to one of the first big matches of the century, the second Frank Gotch vs. George Hackenschmidt match from 1911, which is still talked about to this day. In that one, Hackenschmidt suffered a knee injury in training, whether deliberate or not, and who actually and how he was injured can be talked about forever, but so many tickets were sold in advance for what was one of the most anticipated sporting events ever held in the US up to that point that he was convinced to do the match. The public was defrauded with the injury being kept quiet. Deals were made, including that the match would be worked and Gotch would carry Hackenschmidt before beating him and give him a fall, although that isn't what resulted, as Gotch took advantage of his injured opponent and beat him in straight falls. The fact Hackenschmidt, due to the injury, wasn't even competitive and in top shape, plus the fact that the gambling establishments pulling betting on the match at the last minute due to a lot of suspicions getting out, pretty well killed wrestling in Chicago and pro wrestling's rep nationwide for a few years. The results of this won't be nearly as damaging or controversial, but Gracie suffered a right upper arm and shoulder injury a few days earlier and said that the doctor ordered him not to fight. Again, with the big advance, he agreed to do the fight if it was limited to a 10-minute time limit, something that wasn't announced until the day of the show. Fans booed that announcement heavily while Renzo Gracie, Ryan's corner man, tried to do a pro wrestling interview saying Ryan was told specifically that he couldn't fight, but how the Gracies don't listen to doctors. There may have been either an agreement, or Sakuraba was being overly professional, because Sakuraba never went after the right arm or shoulder in the fight, and pretty well controlled things going the distance. Sakuraba has now defeated Royler, Royce, Renzo and Ryan Gracie in defense of his mythical title as pound for pound the best fighter in the world. The show aired live on pay-per-view in Japan. A Last Word was scheduled to air in the US on pay-per-view on Jan. 6th. The show was long, but ultimately had to be considered a disappointment with 7 of the 9 matches going the distance, a lot of them marred by slow action which resulted in a lot of yellow cards being issued for stalling. 1. Guy Mesger of Ken Shamrock's Lion's Den knocked out Alexander Otsuka, Takashi Otsuka, in 154. Mesger hit a high kick and a right hook to the jaw which knocked Otsuka of the Battle Arts promotion down, and the fight was stopped. 2. Carlos Newton of Canada won a decision in 20 minutes over João de Oliveira of Brazil in a battle of 170-pound division fighters. Newton controlled the first round on the ground. De Oliveira, in his first match back from being badly turned by the entrance pyro at a Pride show, bled from the face. Second round was said to be kind of boring, with both men being cautioned with a yellow card with 2 minutes left. 3. Rico Rodriguez won a decision in 20 minutes over John Marsh in a heavyweight battle. Marsh is Royce Gracie's training partner and specializes in boxing, while Rodriguez is a strong wrestler. Nobuhiko Takada was Rodriguez's second. They traded early with Rodriguez scoring a takedown. In the second round, Rodriguez took him down and twice went for a necklock type of submission before time expired, and he got the unanimous decision. Gary Goodridge and Mark Coleman came out for promos. Goodridge did a pretty decent pro wrestling interview, basically apologizing for not kicking anyone's ass on this show, and then asked how many people wanted to see him kick Shinya Hashimoto's, his opponent, on New Year's Eve, and basically nobody responded. It was kind of funny, actually. I've always felt between his look, his ring entrance and his promos, that Goodridge had the best shot of this crop of shoot fighters as a pro wrestler. At least until the bell rings, and then who knows? Goodridge also mentioned that Mark Kerr was next to him instead of Coleman, but then corrected himself saying that there were a lot of marks around. Coleman didn't do nearly as strong of a pro wrestling interview, but said he would be back next year to defend his world heavyweight title in the Grand Prix tournament. 4. Ricardo Almeida upset Akira Shoji via decision in 20 minutes. Shoji, who is completely out of his mind, fought while recovering from appendicitis and held off having an appendectomy until after the fight. Almeida is from New York's Renzo Gracie gym, and Renzo was in his corner. Almeida got the first takedown but was caught in the guard. After they got back to their feet about 6 minutes later, both were tired. Shoji went for a face lock and both exchanged punches to end the round. Shoji got hit with a low blow, which led to a yellow card and a 3-minute delay. Considering his physical condition, that probably was double the usual effect. Almeida bloodied Shoji's nose with a punch and the match was stopped for the doctor to check him, but he allowed it to continue. Shoji took Almeida down but his nose was bleeding badly. They exchanged punches until Almeida scored a takedown to get the decision. 5. Heath Herring defeated Enson Inoue in 4:31 via ref stoppage. Herring, a wrestler who started his career out of the USWF in Amarillo, is coming off a huge upset win over Tom Erickson at the last Pride show, has of late been studying kickboxing in Holland. After an exchange, Herring took Inoue down and went for a shoulder lock, but Inoue escaped with punches. Herring took Inoue down in the guard, but Inoue took hard shots. Then Herring got a side mount and hit him with hard knees before the match was stopped. Inoue was upset at first of the stoppage. The ref thought he tapped, but he didn't. Inoue then surprisingly announced his retirement after the match. The audience screamed for him not to. 6. Vanderlei Silva of Brazil defeated American Dan Henderson via decision in 20 minutes in apparently a hot match and a battle of fighters at around the 200-pound mark. Silva was able to take down the two-time Olympic wrestler and strike from the top. After a stand-up, Silva scored with leg kicks, but Henderson retaliated with a strong punch, opening up a bad cut above Silva's left eye. Henderson then took Silva down and went after the cut. The match was stopped to examine the cut, but allowed to continue. When it restarted, Silva knocked Henderson down with a punch and hit a knee to the head on the ground, which was illegal because of Henderson's positioning, and Silva got a yellow card. Henderson was hurt by the illegal blow and given time to recover. When the match restarted, Silva knocked Henderson down. Henderson was on top in the guard, throwing more blows. A very wild round. Second round saw Silva wind up on top again. After both stood up, Silva knocked Henderson down again. Silva was on top in the guard and both got yellow cards for stalling, meaning Silva was one foul away from losing via DQ. Silva got on top again, finally getting a mount and doing some real damage in winning a unanimous decision. 7. Kazuyuki Fujita of New Japan Pro Wrestling beat Gilbert Yvel of Holland via unanimous decision after 20 minutes to up his shoot record to an improbable 6-0 this year, probable because he's totally beatable by a top fighter who can neutralize his takedowns as he has no punch defense. Fujita had Don Frye and Yuki Kondo in his corner. Fujita took Yvel down and pretty well dominated him in a boring match. He went for submissions, including a few arm bars, but didn't get them. In the second round, Fujita took Yvel down again and went for a choke. Yvel got a yellow card for stalling. Yvel went for a high knee, but Fujita caught him and took him down again. Fujita kept him grounded for the rest of the fight. Yvel can be one of the most exciting fighters around, but he doesn't have the ability to avoid a takedown or get off his back, so unless he's in a sport like rings with frequent stand-ups, he's only going to win when he gets off the big punch or kick immediately before being taken down, like he did with Goodridge. 8. Igor Vovchankin of Russia defeated Mark Kerr via unanimous decision after 25 minutes. Kerr started things off taking Vovchankin down and going for a neck crank. After a stand-up when things had stalled on the ground, Vovchankin hit a few punches but Kerr took him down and nothing happened. Fans were booing the match, which tells you how bad it must have been for Japanese to boo. Both got yellow cards for stalling. Both men were noticeably tired by the end of the round. Kerr took Vovchankin down at the start of the round. Kerr ate a knee in doing the takedown, and Vovchankin was more active punching from the bottom. Kerr threw some strong punches but the crowd was bored again. Vovchankin got his second yellow card for stalling, so he was one caution away from a DQ. Realizing his back was against the wall, Vovchankin started throwing punches and kicks and put Kerr down. Vovchankin got behind him but Kerr went for an armlock. Kerr came back with a takedown and got him out before the round was over. Although Vovchankin did more damage, he also had 2 yellows, so it was ruled a draw and they went into overtime. Vovchankin dominated the overtime with punches, bloodying Kerr up, and even took him down and pounded him during the round. Kerr managed to get on top, but Vovchankin threw hard shots from the bottom and when overtime ended, got the decision. 9. Sakuraba beat Gracie via decision in 10 minutes. Sakuraba came out wearing a Santa Claus mask and a bag. Very little happened in this fight as Sakuraba was on top, missed with an armbar and then in a dominant position, started punching the ribs. Sakuraba kept going for a submission in the last minute but time ran out. The one thing about shoot shows is that they are totally unpredictable. Coming off the heels of a UFC show where the Japanese fared badly, came a rings show on December 22nd where they looked very good. When the dust cleared, the 8 finalists in the second annual shoot version of the Rings King of Kings tournament, which takes place on February 24th at Sumo Hall, which was spawned from a worked version of the same tournament, are UFC heavyweight champion Randy Couture, Dave Mena, Valentin Novarim, and Antonio Nogueira, who all qualified back on October 9th in Tokyo. They will be joined by the 4 men who came out of this tournament before a disappointing crowd of 3,000 fans at Osaka Furutsu Gym: Folk Han, Hiromitsu Kaneara, Tsuyoshi Kosaka, and Yoshihisa Yamamoto. Reports seem to indicate that this show was considerably better than the more well-attended and more publicized Pride show that took place the next day. The performance of Han, billed at 39 but generally believed to be several years older, may have been the big story in the tournament. Han, a former world champion in Samba, debuted with rings in the early days of the company and was Akira Maida's top rival in the days of it being a pure worked group. With his mastery of submissions, Han turned his legit ability into becoming something of an incredible technical worker, some would argue right at the top of any list of pro wrestlers in history, but penalized in balloting because of the limited rings exposure. Han routinely had near match of the year caliber bouts when facing the Japanese wrestlers who could really go. The switch to shoot seems sad for fans of Han, who has gotten some support every year in the Observer Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame balloting because rings shoot rules favor strikers, which Han had little background in. The evolution of the game has worked away from submissions because the awareness of them is so much greater and they are harder to use effectively than in the early 90s when submission fighters dominated in shoot. Most importantly, Han's mat artistry in worked matches would be lost in a shoot environment. Forgetting the match quality and artistry issues, Han, going against younger strikers, looked to be put in a position where he could get hurt, and thus ruining the fantasy of what he actually had accomplished over the past decade in pro wrestling. But he's now faced 3 very credible opponents in shoot and has gone 3-0, a national caliber amateur wrestler, Brandon Lee Hinkle, a good kickboxer with ground experience, Lee Hasdell, and a huge tough guy with lots of MMA experience, Bobby Hoffman. He shockingly knocked out an ISCA world-ranked kickboxer, Hasdell of England, 8 seconds into the second round with an uppercut punch, making good on his promise to learn to be an effective boxer. In the second match, he had a tough battle with Hoffman. After regulation, 2 judges ruled it a draw and the third for Hoffman, so they went into an overtime round where Han's better conditioning spelled the difference, winning unanimous decision. The small crowd was blamed on being in the same city just 9 days before Antonio Inoki's far more highly publicized show at the Osaka Dome. Although Rings has now gone to an all-shoot format, starting as a worked promotion and slowly adding a higher percentage of shoot matches as the years went on before going 100% for last year's King of Kings tournament and maintaining throughout the year, they still draw primarily a pro wrestling fan base. Kaneara first defeated Brazilian Alexander Cacareco Ferreira in 2:45 of the second round with an old pro wrestler hooker move, the double wrist lock, and then shocked the bigger Tom Sauer of the United States with a combination high kick and punch for a knockout at 4:14. Kosaka knocked out Rings veteran Mikhail Ilyakhin at 1:53 of the second round with a punch in a battle of ground experts. In his second round, he was scheduled against Russian judo star Fedor Yemelyanenko. Yemelyanenko was cut badly and the fight was stopped only 10 seconds in. Yamamoto, who has had a tough year, getting hammered on by people like Brandon Lee Hinkle and Semishul, beat Emirhan Bitsadze of Georgia in 4:39 with an armbar, which was no surprise, but then knockout out Chris Haseman of Australia with some great low kicks in 3:51, which had to be a huge surprise, particularly since Haseman earlier had beaten highly touted Brazilian Carlos Barreto via decision in the first round. Due to the Christmas holiday, the weekend ratings and detailed ratings of any of the shows aren't available at press time. We should have more detail in next week's issue on these numbers. SmackDown on December 21st drew a 4.5 rating and 7 share, down slightly with a show which featured so much emphasis on Vince McMahon. It was generally considered, aside from the tag title match where Edge and Christian regained the belts from Undertaker and Rock when Ref Angle gave Rock the Olympic slam leading to the win, a decent show but not of the usual caliber. SmackDown placed 5th out of the 6 networks, beating only WB programming. Thunder on December 20th fell to a 1.9 rating. December 19th Galavision Lucha Libre show drew a 1.8 Hispanic rating, with its strongest demographic being males 12 to 24, hitting a 2.9. Mexico. This is the traditional slow season for wrestling, as usually Arena Mexico and EMLL tones down after the year-end show and starts building for February. This year, I guess because business is strong, they continued Arena Mexico this past Friday with a Tarzan Boy vs. El Satanico main event where Ultimo Guerrero helped Tarzan Boy win, turning on his Infernales partner, which is a turn that has been going on for a few weeks. In the semi, Los Villanos beat CMLL Trios champs Dr. Wagner Jr. and Blue Panther and Black Warrior to set up a title match in the next few weeks. Nicho Psicosis won the hair versus hair match over Scorpio Jr. to headline the December 22nd show in Tijuana, in a match with tons of interference and Scorpio getting DQ'd when the ref saw him apply the Martinete tombstone piledriver, causing him to lose his hair. El Hijo del Santo and Negro Casas and La Parca beat Rey Bucanero, the third member of the Infernales team who wasn't at Arena Mexico, and Damien and Rey Mysterio Sr. Rey Mysterio Jr. was originally to be part of the babyface team, but WCW wouldn't give him approval to work the show. On December 21st in Nezahualcóyotl, Mascara de Sagrada won a Minis mask versus mask match over Payasito Rojo, which was a rare case of putting the Minis in a main event. Payasito Rojo was unmasked as Miguel Angel Rodriguez. In the semi, Silver King and Dandy retained the WWA tag titles, which have never been mentioned for probably 3 years, over Super Parka and Mascara Sagrada, and there were post-match challenges for a double hair versus double mask match. Silver King and Dandy are doing their short-lived Los Fabulosos gimmick. Remember when they were managed by Miss Hancock? From WCW. Caught the Ricky Marvin vs. Virus match on Galavision on December 26th. It was edited from 30 minutes down to 12 minutes for TV. Very good match, but not off the page or anything. All Japan. Rob Van Dam is likely to be appearing at the Jan. 28th Tokyo Dome show, although I haven't heard any word it was confirmed. Van Dam would be doing it as much to be there for Hansen's retirement ceremony, since Van Dam learned a lot of his wrestling from his years with All Japan. Pro Wrestling Noah. The biggest show in the short history of the company on December 23rd at the Tokyo Ariake Coliseum was considered a big success, as it sold out 12,000 tickets well in advance, and was said to have been the best of all the major shows of the past week. It included the debut of Shinya Hashimoto, who pinned Takao Mori with a brainbuster in 6:32 in a match third from the top, which the reports were was surprising because Amori didn't get that much offense in. The pushed main event saw Kenta Kobashi pin Jun Akiyama in the group's best possible singles matchup, winning with a burning hammer, torture rack into a Death Valley driver, in 35:58. Based on what we were told, some of the reporters who do the Japanese awards balloting were saying that if the balloting wasn't already done, this match would have a good shot at winning Match of the Year because it was the best match all year in Japan. The show aired on pay-per-view on December 24th, so hopefully we'll have a chance to see the show and comment on it for next week's issue. Mitsuharu Misawa had his first singles match in the new promotion with Vader, with Misawa winning with a running elbow smash in 14:28 in what was said to have been a good match. Yoshihiro Takayama got the big push as a single with a pinfall on Akira Tao after an Enzui Jiri and a second high kick in 9:29. In the undercard, FMW's Wu Tag Team title went back to the home promotion as Koto Fuyuki and Tetsuhiro Kuroda won the belts from Noah's team of Namichi Marufuji, a very good smaller wrestler, and Tomoe Honda in 13:13. Hashimoto is only working a few shows, such as in January, he'll only be working the Jan. 13th show in Osaka. He'll probably work the February 25th show in Kobe, which is the first major arena show of the new year, and he'll be part of the tournament to crown the global heavyweight champion sometime early in the year. They did a fan appreciation type show the next day at Differ Ariake as the fans voted different wrestlers on different teams for unique matchups, which included putting mid-card comedy wrestlers Rusher Kimura and Haruka Eigen in their first main event in more than a decade. Vader came out wearing a Santa Claus outfit and in a six-man faced usual partner 2 Cold Scorpio. When Vader came out, instead of it's Vader time, he said it's Christmas time. Takashi Sugiura, an amateur wrestling star, made his debut on December 23rd and people were very high on his potential, comparing his ring style to Kurt Angle, and they are already wanting to push him as a tag team with Tomoe Honda, who is nothing as a pro but represented Japan in 3 Olympics. Another rookie getting a lot of praise is Kenta Kobayashi, who will main event the Jan. 18th Korakuen Hall show teaming with Kobashi against Misawa and Marufuji. New Japan. At the company's final show of the year on December 23rd at Korakuen Hall, they announced the company awards. Kensuke Sasaki was named MVP. Sasaki vs. Toshiaki Kawada from October 9th at the Tokyo Dome was named Match of the Year. The tag match with Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Satoshi Kojima vs. Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi from that same show was named Tag Match of the Year. Yutaka Yoshi was named New Wave Wrestler, Best Rising Star. Takashi Iizuka was named Best Technical Wrestler. Nakanishi got the Fighting Spirit Award and Jushin Liger got the Distinguished Performance Award. The December 14th pay-per-view was a disappointment, doing in 0.9 buy rate or about 20,000 buys even with the interpromotional main event of Nagata and Iizuka vs. Kawada and Masafuchi. It pretty well shows that the mentality in Japan, which is totally different than the US because fans have been conditioned to see all the big matches live on TV rather than pay to watch them on TV. Same reason why far more popular sports like college football have never done boxing and wrestling numbers on pay-per-view, because the mentality is that you get the big games for free on TV, that it's going to be a struggle to get people to buy monthly PPVs, and it's not just putting a show on pay-per-view and advertising it that'll draw, but having a marquee matchup. It also shows what marquee is, because Choshu Onita figured to be terrible, but it was 2 major celebrities. The tag match had the interpromotional thing going, but Nagata and Iizuka aren't drawing cards, nor is Fuchi, and interpromotional alone wasn't enough to draw big on pay-per-view even though it drew probably the best crowd heat of the year. Again, showing heat doesn't equal money. New Japan's first pay-per-view on July 30th with Choshu vs. Onita did double that number. The all-time pay-per-view record remains 48,000 buys, 2.2 buy rate, for Pride May. First Tokyo Dome show mainly for Hoist Gracie vs. Sakuraba as the big draw, although the tournament itself was also a draw. The next pay-per-view show will be from Sumo Hall on February 14th. Regarding the show itself, as of press time, I've seen about half the show. The other half could be horrible and it would still be a strong candidate for best show of the year. Iizuka and Nagata vs. Kawada and Fuchi was a textbook study in psychology, building a match, selling holds and drawing heat. It was, by the time it was over, the most intensely heated match I've seen all year and a strong candidate for next year's Match of the Year awards and definite 5 stars. The Osaka Pro vs. New Japan Juniors match, Liger and Tanaka and Makabe vs. Delphin and Tsubasa and Takahiro Murahama, was at 4.25 stars as well, and Kanemoto carried Fujinami past the 3 stars level. Main event on the final show of the year was Kojima and Tenzan over Kendo Kashin and Nakanishi in 11:21 when Tenzan pinned Kashin after a diving headbutt. Kashin walked out early, but was dragged back to ringside by Nagata. Kashin later hit Nakanishi with a chair shot when Tenzan moved, and Nakanishi walked off, but he came back later in the match. December 9th TV was the best NJTV show in a long time, focusing on the ending of what up until that point had been a boring tag team tournament. In the first semi, Tenzan and Kojima beat Yoshi and Nakanishi in 15:56. It was Kojima versus Yoshi most of the way. Finally, Nakanishi made the hot tag and did his jumping around to set up the rack. However, Tenzan pinned him after a moonsault 3.25 stars. The other semifinal saw Iizuka and Nagata beat Scott Norton and Masahiro Chono in 12:06. How good can a match be with Norton involved? It was actually not bad at all, even though Norton technically is horrible. They injured Nagata early, leaving Iizuka to get pounded on for several minutes. Norton threw a flying shoulder block, which is a simple move, but he still nearly killed himself. Iizuka survived the SDF and made ropes. Finally, Iizuka moved so Chono gave Norton the Yakuza kick. Iizuka immediately grabbed a choke on Chono while Nagata put the Nagata lock on Norton and Chono submitted. Finish really got over with Chono submitting to Iizuka since nobody expected it, 2.5 stars. Koji Kanemoto and Minoru Tanaka retained the IWGP Junior Tag titles over Kashin and Super Strong Kashin, Tatsuhito Takaiwa under a mask. Really good heat and built into an excellent match. All kinds of great moves. Kanemoto went for a standing ankle lock after a moonsault on Kashin, but SS Kashin made the save with a chair to the back. SS Kashin signaled for the triple bomb, but after the first one, Tanaka maneuvered it into an ankle lock, but he made the ropes. Finish saw SS Kashin take off his mask, as a signal that he was getting serious, although there wasn't much of a pop since everyone knew it was Takaiwa, and started pounding on Kanemoto. As he went for a power bomb, Kanemoto got him in a heel hook for the submission at 16:06, 4 stars. Tag tourney finals saw Iizuka and Nagata over Tenzan and Kojima in 1909. Super match with everyone pulling out all the stops. Nagata vs Kojima was exceptional. They had several great exchanges where they pounded on each other. Tenzan missed a moonsault and Iizuka went with a crossface while Nagata got the Nagata lock on Kojima. Finally Tenzan made the ropes after a great struggle. They did a 3D on Iizuka, and went for the same thing on Nagata, but he blocked it and hit a back suplex on Kojima. Tenzan hit a Tenzan driver on Nagata and a moonsault, but Iizuka saved. Iizuka choked Tenzan but Kojima saved. Finally Nagata pinned Tenzan after 2 back suplexes. 4.25 stars. December 16th was the second hot TV show in a row, taped from December 10th in Nagoya for the Team 2000 show. They aired the arena opener, which was the gimmick of G-Eggs, Team 2000's rivals, being put in the opener because Chono was the matchmaker. So Nagata and Nakanishi and Yoshi beat Iizuka and Junji Hirata and Kenzo Suzuki. Very good for an opener, particularly the sequences with Nagata versus Iizuka. Suzuki has shown a lot of improvement in recent months as far as looking comfortable in the ring, but his offense is still mainly spears. Yoshi got the submission on Suzuki with a Boston Crab in 13:23, 3 stars. Liger and Samurai beat Shinya Makabe and Takaiwa in 14:12. Typical very good match with the crowd really into Makabe on offense and getting near falls on Liger, hoping for the upset. It built real well, but then the ending came a little suddenly with Liger pinning Makabe with a brainbuster. 3.25 stars. Sasaki pinned Ohara in 6 seconds after a lariat. Ohara did a stretcher job selling the move. People popped real big for the finish, so it worked live. Tanaka beat Akira in 1909 to retain the IWGP Junior title. I guess because he just won the title for the first time, Tanaka just doesn't come across as a champion like Liger or Kanemoto do. But this match may have changed that. Akira, judging from this match, has got to be the most underrated wrestler in the business. He looked phenomenal, both as a worker as well as with charisma and a cool ring entrance showing his acting ability. He rarely wrestles as he's an on-stage actor. He did a great tope, except that he shot by Tanaka on the floor and landed practically in Seiji Sakaguchi's lap. Akira started working the knee, hit a missile dropkick and went for the figure 4. Akira did 2 high splashes off the top for great near falls. Incredible finishing sequence as Akira blocked a flying armbar into an armbar of his own, but Tanaka reversed it into a leg lock and then into a heel hook for the submission, 4.25 stars. Main saw Tenzan and Kojima retain the IWGP tag titles over Chono and Goto in 15:22. All the G-Eggs guys were at ringside watching the Battle of Team 2000. Tenzan and Kojima carried it all the way to a watchable match. They did an American spot where they each had a pin, but Hiro Saito pulled ref Masao Hattori out of the ring at the count of 2. Kojima ended up pinning Goto after a lariat, 1.75 stars. Other Japan notes. Weekly Pro Wrestling polled all active wrestlers for their picks as the MVP of Japanese wrestling history, and Giant Baba won over Antonio Inoki. Because most of the wrestlers are in their 20s and 30s, they grew up with Baba and Inoki, but not Rikidozan, which explains that result. When asked to pick the biggest foreign star ever in Japan, the winner, in a surprise of sorts, was Bruiser Brody. Antonio Inoki will have a 5-minute exhibition match on the New Year's Eve show. We've gotten reports absolutely raving about the December 21st Toriuman show at Korakuen Hall before an overflow crowd of more than 2,000. This group draws a different fan base. About 40% of the crowd are women, who in the younger age demo that pro wrestling draws from culturally in Tokyo, younger women have more disposable income. Ryo Saito is using a new move called the Locomotion Fisherman Suplex, 5 consecutive suplexes. The negative with the high-flying style is the high injury rate. The main event was interesting, because they did it Mexican style. It is a lucha libre promotion and realistically for work rate the best of that style in the world. With the stars in the semifinal in a 6-man and putting the gimmick match, with usual undercard guys, on in the main event position to get the gimmick over, using Taru and Stalker Ichikawa, who never wins, against Susumu Mochizuki and Yasushi Kanda in a loser gets his head shaved match. Ichikawa does undercard comedy sometimes with a Gracie gimmick as a spoof, claiming he's had 400 fights with no wins. Ichikawa scored his first pin and Kanda, who lost, got his head shaved. Sumo Dandy Fuji 29 announced his final match would be Jan. 7th in Osaka, ending a career that lasted less than 4 years. Don't know if this is an angle, or if it's simply injuries from the tough style, but it would be a shame if it's a real retirement. Ayako Hamada retained her Queen of Urgent title on December 24th at Korakuen Hall, beating retiring sister Xochitl Hamada with Gran Hamada as referee in a hair versus hair match before a crowd announced at 1,250. Ayako bladed, but came back to win with an eye cutter, diamond cutter, off the top rope and some spin kicks. Both sisters were wildly crying as Xochitl had her head shaved and then had her retirement ceremony with numerous people, including her son as well as Gran Apache and Tiger Mask presenting her with flowers and gifts, and she left to a standing ovation. By the time she left, every member of the family was crying. Urgent announced it had signed a contract with Sky Perfect TV and its first big show of the near year on Jan. 27th at Korakuen Hall would air on February 4th. Battle Arts announced it would run shows under the Battle Arts name and style in Florida promoted by Carl Malenko next year. At a press conference they said they would promote shows next year in India, the Philippines and other Asian countries in a summer tour, and would open the new US Battle Arts style promotion in August, where they would develop their own group of regulars and work shoot style. They are planning 6 Korakuen shows in 2001 with the first on Jan. 7th headlined by Yuki Ishikawa vs Kazunari Murakami. They announced a 5th anniversary show for March 25th in Odawara. FMW is running its first pay-per-view of the year on Jan. 7th at Korakuen Hall. They also run Jan. 5th at Korakuen Hall and may shoot angles at that show to build for this. Pat Tanaka and Chris Condito will be the top foreigners on the show. They also Super Delphin announced his mystery partner as Z Mandara, one of those masked monsters, for the main event of biggest show ever for Osaka Pro Wrestling on Jan. 7th in their home city against Jushin Liger and El Samurai. They also announced they would be moving their home base in March to the new Super Delphin Arena, a 300-seat building in Osaka. With Dick Togo and company gone, Black Buffalo, who is former IWA wrestler Keisuke Yamada, has become the top heel in the group. Etsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda won All Japan Women's Annual Year-End Tag Team Tournament on December 23rd at Korakuen Hall first, reaching the finals by going to a 30-minute draw against Momoe Nakanishi and Nani Takahashi, and then immediately going into the finals beating Manami Toyota and KO Nomi when Mita pinned Toyota with the Death Valley Bomb in 13:33, the move she popularized. Louis Piccoli saw it on a tape and started using it, and it got popular in the US from there. The win sets Mita and Shimoda up for a tag title match against WWA champs Nakanishi and Takahashi on Jan. 4th at Korakuen Hall. At the show, the company announced its awards with Kaoru Ito as MVP, Toyota vs Eagle Sawai on July 14th TV taping as match of the year, and Ito and Nakanishi and Takahashi vs Mita and Shimoda and Maikawa in a cage match on November 23rd was named Tag Team Match of the Year. Toyota got her win back, so to speak, winning a 10-woman tournament held the next day at the Yokohama Bunka Gym, which also featured a retirement versus All-Pacific title match where Tomoko Watanabe won the title and thus didn't have to retire, beating Maikawa. Great Kabuki, 52, who retired a few years back, came back for one match on December 26th at Korakuen Hall for IWA, teaming with Yuji Kito to lose to Koto Fuyuki and Chocoball Mukai of FMW. Tarzan Goto, who was the top star with IWA, was fired because it was found out he was negotiating with Atsushi Onita. Kabuki said he would never wrestle again until next June, when he wanted to do one last match teaming with Rusher Kimura on a Noah show to commemorate Kimura still being a wrestler at the age of 60. Kimura turned 60 on June 30th. Here and there. Johnny Valentine has continued his fight for his life and has been in and out of intensive care since mid-August when he broke his back falling off the front porch. In both mid-August and again in early September, Valentine came near death's door, and is there again after a lung infection caused his lungs to shut down and he became dangerously dehydrated. During his career, Valentine is believed to have held more different championships, not like a 14-time hardcore champion, but different regional titles around the world than any wrestler in history. 31 different in all. John Molinaro has a great article on the Slam Wrestling site regarding his condition. Both Valentine and the Sheik, Ed Farhat, have been in very rough shape on and off in recent months. UPW ran both a live webcast and a TV taping on December 20th in Santa Ana, California at the Galaxy Theater before a packed house of about 700. The atmosphere at these shows because of the setup is a cut above anything I've seen at indie shows, and they have a very enthusiastic crowd. The show featured some big names such as the Hardys, Lita, and Juventud Guerrera, along with top area indie wrestlers Christopher Daniels and Michael Modest. Hardys and Lita beat Ballard Brothers and Lexi Fife in the main event, which wasn't taped for TV but I believe was on the webcast. The TV taping was a pilot and they don't have a station lined up at this point. Aside from the top guys, it was basically an indie show. Nathan Jones, who is under WWF developmental contract because he's 6'10" and has competed in World's Strongest Man contests, and did one worked match with Pride a few years back putting over Koji Kao and seemed to have some charisma for it. At this point is just a bodyguard and did almost nothing physical. Prototype, John Cena, has the most promise. He's got an exceptional physique and look. He actually has superstar charisma and good athletic ability, but he is not ready in the ring. Hopefully he won't be rushed to the big time, because if he's brought up too soon, people will see him before he's ready and he'll get a rep as a worker that he'll have to overcome. But he's got something that most of the 6'5" muscle guys don't have, and something that a lot of guys who by looks people think should have it. Chuck Palumbo is a perfect example of a guy who, when you look at him, you think he should have it, but people don't react to him like he's anything special. Whereas Kerry Von Erich, from another era, had it, and Cena is reminiscent of that. Because of the similarity in look, people are comparing him to Sting from 15 years ago. Guerrera and Mikey Henderson had the best match in the ring, which from a technical wrestling standpoint was better than all but the top-level matches on WWF and WCW pay-per-view shows. Henderson could be a player in the WCW Cruiserweight division as far as his look goes, and he's a talented worker. Not sure about his promos or charisma other than he can click great in the ring with a top worker. Daniels could be a guy to build the division around because he's got all the tools both as a performer and in working a match. Rob Van Dam is a regular at these events since he lives in the area, and did some TV commentary. Van Dam seems to have accepted the idea he's not going back to ECW and will most likely at some point early in the year make a decision about WWF or WCW. His agent has talked with both companies, but as of this week, neither had made a substantial offer. WWF has interest and also some trepidation as the wrestlers themselves were higher on Jerry Lynn, who most expect will be WWF bound very shortly, than Van Dam. WCW can't really make an offer because there is a hiring freeze of sorts until the company sale goes through. Don't know Bischoff's thoughts on Van Dam, but at this point there are two schools of thought and it all depends on the financial situation of his new company. He either has to take the tack that because nobody is drawing in the company, and there are no fresh matchups at this point that will draw, he needs to bring in new faces and push them to the top, whether they are ready or not, to create a fresh atmosphere at the top. The second is that because the payroll under contract is so high already, he can't add new people at big numbers and will work to create scenarios with what he already has. As it pertains to Van Dam, timing is everything. Under one scenario, he almost would need to be pushed all the way to the top, because he's probably the most marketable guy who is a free agent right now. Under the other scenario, he may not even get a job with WCW. Mike Rapata regained the NWA title from Sabu on December 22nd in Nashville before 300 fans at the fairgrounds, although even that figure was heavily papered. Bad Attitude, Rick Michaels and David Young regained the NWA tag titles on the same show over Air Paris and Rob Williams in a ladder match that reports have it was an amazing match, including Paris doing what was described as an Osai moonsault onto the ladder. The two teams will be rematched in a double ladder match on December 30th. Sabu's jaw is a mess, as is his bad knee, as he couldn't put any weight on it at all. Sabu badly cut his wrist legit going through a table and they went to the finish fast because of the cut. Sabu looked like he badly needed time off. Randy Savage will be appearing in the Spider-Man movie as lead villain Sawbones McGraw. They're filming scenes in mid-January of a Cage Pro Wrestling match between Spider-Man and Sawbones. All Pro Wrestling has a King of the Indies tournament on December 30th in Galt, California, with first-round matches of Michael Modest vs. Robert Thompson, Donovan Morgan vs. Vic Capri, Scoot Andrews vs. Vinny Massara, and Boyce LeGrand vs. Christopher Daniels. Dutch Mantle was fired as booker of WWC on December 17th. As expected, WWC announced its junior title as vacant since Trailer Park Trash was fired. Mantle had accused Trash of stealing money and insisted that either Trash would get fired or he would leave. Mantle was the one who got Trash into Puerto Rico, and the two were roommates for 3 months. There is much doubt as to whether Trash actually stole any money. It is believed IWA had been attempting to raid Mantle from WWC. In the Puerto Rico TV ratings, WWC over the weekend of December 16th to 17th drew 11.4 and 10.2 ratings, while IWA drew 7.9 and 5.5 respectively. First big show of the year is Jan. 6th with Carly Colon vs. Jeff Jarrett for the Universal title, Kurt Hennig vs. Ray Gonzalez, and Vader I vs. Fidel Sierra for the Puerto Rican title. Abdullah the Butcher vs. One Man Gang, Thunder and Lightning defend the WWC tag titles against Barry and Kendall Windham. El Bronco vs. Horace Hogan and Mexican Minis Octagon Cheeto and Mascarada Sagrada vs. Pirate Tito Morgan and Pierre Auth Tito. It is interesting that WWC cleared Jarrett working this indie date but have denied many of the mid-card wrestlers' requests to work indie dates because of the injury risk, which continues the belief that appears to be well-grounded about double standards. Problem is, in the entertainment world there will always be double standards based on who is more valuable, but in WCW, they are far too pronounced, and that is another issue Bischoff should deal with, although he was in charge when this problem became worse. IWA on the same weekend is bringing in only Yoshihiro Tajiri and Minis Max Mini and Torito, who are considered the two best of the group, Zuki and Espectrito I in Mexico. IWA, with its ties to Mexico through Victor Quiñones booking talent into Mexico for seemingly ever, was the only promotion outside of Mexico we're aware of to publicly acknowledge the death of Blue Demon on its TV show. The Urban Wrestling Alliance has hired Rocky Johnson as its new booker. There are pluses and minuses to the move. Johnson has been in wrestling since the 60s, but wrestling has undergone tremendous changes since Johnson got out of it full-time. While Johnson probably would recognize some of the obvious problems with the group, such as far too many women, he's also talked about things like limiting people coming off the top rope and other things that were done way back when to protect moves that simply can't be done today because of what fans want and because what fans have learned from WWF TV changes everything. Daniel Buchantz, whose son Jeff is a longtime correspondent and was also a former world-class fencer, was voted into the Jewish Sports Hall of Fame and will be inducted on July 18th in Israel. The elder Buchantz was a world-class fencer and fencing official from 1952 through 1984. The Philadelphia Inquirer on December 26 ran a story about deaths of high school athletes. It was a good, well-researched story going into causes of deaths and noting from 1982 through 1999 that 370 high school athletes had died, noting among other things 16 football players in the last 6 years from heat stroke, and there have been 16 high school football deaths this year, 3 from heat and 10 from heart problems, and there have been 175 fatalities in high school football over the 18-year period from 1982 through 1999 and 76 basketball fatalities. There is a flip side before anyone starts justifying wrestling's problems by this story. This was a very good story written in a major newspaper about death rate in sports, which from the leading researcher in the field said is less than 1 death out of every 100,000 per year. The current rate among Major League American pro wrestlers, 233 in all in 1998, based on studying the past 3 years, is 1 in 87. Granted, they are older, and there are reasons such as no off-season, lots of travel, etc. why the rate should be much higher than for high school athletes, but no reason it should be as high as it is. On the flip side, Major League wrestlers today are far bigger celebrities than high school athletes, so to say this is an underreported story is the understatement of the year, considering the high school stats are considered worthy of study. On the amateur side, the NCAA championships, which are March 15th to March 17th in Iowa City, have sold out the 13,000-seat building for all 5 sessions. The 2 biggest meets in the world are also going to be at major arenas in the U.S. this year, with the World Cup at the Baltimore Arena on May 5th and May 6th, and the World Championships in Madison Square Garden from September 26th to September 29th. MMA. UFC show was kind of flat, with a mixed reaction to it on pay-per-view. They somehow managed to get the show, with all the quick matches, to well over 2 hours, partially by showing a time limit draw in a dark match from the previous show in Atlantic City before the main event. Not much in the way of good interviews. They announced a New Year's Eve pay-per-view, which has been their tradition and used to do big numbers in the early years of UFC, which is 6 hours of taped matches dating back to the inception of UFC in 1993. The next live show is scheduled for February 23rd in Atlantic City, and the date was announced on the broadcast, but that is hardly etched in stone at this point and tickets are not on sale yet. Pat Miletic fought the fight with a severe heel injury, and actually looked really impressive in beating Kenichi Yamamoto, the former pro wrestler. As soon as the match was over, he was in such pain that he couldn't put any weight on his bad leg, so I'm presuming he wouldn't be ready for February 23rd. Heavyweight champ Randy Couture is already booked for rings on February 24th, so he can't defend. That would leave Tito Ortiz, but there is no challenger seemingly ready. Ortiz looked more dominant than ever, and I think even Sakuraba would have hard time handling his reach and size advantage. And Ortiz versus Vitor Belfort on paper sounds like a great match, and Belfort's boxing ability would make him dangerous, and he's strong at grappling, but Belfort is so unpredictable you are taking a big risk building a show around him. In the commentary, they did nothing to build up a potential new challenger except casually out of nowhere talk about Ortiz versus Renzo Gracie, but that may be too much of a size mismatch for a strong commissioned state. Matt Lindland looked very impressive in giving a beating to Yoji Angio. The Tito Ortiz versus Yuki Kondo match, while disappointing because it was so short, was an explosive match while it lasted and the most excitement on the show. Kondo knocked Ortiz down with the greatest flying knee to the face ever in UFC right away. Ortiz got up and got mad and was just too strong for Kondo, and gave him a maniacal pummeling before getting the submission with what was really a half Nelson type of move. The Matt Hughes-Dennis Hallman match was amazing. Hughes, a strong wrestler who many believed was the top 170-pounder in the world, lost to Hallman in 17 seconds in a match they aired the tape of early in his MMA career. He's since won 18 matches in a row and was looking to avenge the only defeat of his career against someone whose record is nowhere close to his, and he got armbarred in 20 seconds. The announcing was done via voiceover in studio, and for that and other reasons, the Japanese shows are never as exciting as the American shows. K1 Grand Prix was a great show on TV. It probably wasn't as good from a casual perspective because so many matches went the distance and the big hitters, Mike Bernardo and Jerome LeBanner, missed the tournament due to injuries. But from a skill level, these guys were awesome and the fights were mainly very competitive. K1's first show of the new year will be Jan 30th in Matsuyama. It'll be mainly a Japanese show with no marquee matches, but those shows have done strong TV ratings for Nippon TV. They are trying to put together a match with Nobuaki Tsunoda versus Frank Shamrock, which would be under K1 rules, which would put Shamrock at a hell of a disadvantage since he's never fought one pro or amateur kickboxing match. The match has yet to be announced, as Tsunoda at this point is facing the dreaded mystery opponent. Pride announced a return date at the Saitama Super Arena for March 25th. Yusuke Imamura, who won the Japanese National Championship in amateur wrestling at 286 pounds, is training at Takada's dojo to debut next year in Pride. In regard to the story about Akira Maeda punching a woman who works in the office while on tour in the United States for the Rings American Tournament Finals in Moline, Illinois, the woman Motoko Uchida quit Rings and now worked for UFC Japan. Manabu Yamada of Pancrase announced his retirement, with his final match being on the Jan 8th debut card in Nagoya. ECW Arena on December 23rd was something of a weird show. The crowd was down from usual. It was said to be similar to Queens in that every seat was packed, but there was no overflow, with the crowd estimated at about 1,000. The wrestlers were all paid checks post-dated for the following Tuesday, leaving them now 6 weeks behind on pay but with no shows until the pay-per-view on Jan 7th. The guys who were on nightly deals were paid as if they had worked 4 shows as opposed to 1. The only wrestlers who didn't appear were Simon Diamond, Swinger, and manager Sinister Minster and Dawn Marie, as Swinger was married, as well as New Jack, who at this point is gone from the promotion, but his retirement from wrestling is already over as he's taking indie dates. Kid Cash is also out of action with the broken ribs suffered last week. He wanted to work, but it was felt best to keep him home and have him return on the pay-per-view. No matches have been announced for the pay-per-view, but the feeling is the main will involve Corino versus Sandman, or maybe another 3-way with Credible. With Puerto Rico shut down for the holidays, Super Crazy returned even though his father died the night before. Show was most notable for trying to duplicate the chair-throwing incident of about 5 years ago, as Sandman told the crowd to throw chairs into the ring. At first people didn't, dozens of them came flying into the ring with security doing nothing about it. Just like when Funk encouraged it years ago, which made a visual that has been a classic on the ECW Open. Some thought it was terribly negligent by the promotion because people, such as fans at ringside, could have gotten hurt, and others thought it made the show. Show opened with Chili Willy versus Blue Boy going about 1 minute before Rhino hit the ring, speared both guys, and then piledrove Jasmine St. Clair off the middle ropes and piledrove ref HC Locke off the apron through a table, which got a huge reaction. During and Roadkill beat Baldies to keep the tag titles when the Buggy Bang on Angel. Mahoney pinned Bilvis Wesley with the Nutcracker Suite on a chair, and continuing the abuse on women, laid out Prodijet with the same move. They did the typical TV show open with Styles and Gertner's nasty poem, when Cyrus and Lynn came out. Lynn pinned Spike Dudley with a cradle piledriver in what was said to have been a good match but didn't have a lot of heat. C.W. Anderson made Crazy tap out to the kneeling armbar in what was also said to have been a good match. Easy Money vs. Nova ended with them doing an angle taking advantage of Nova's ear injury, as he bled badly from the ear and the match was stopped. The angle was done because if Nova needs surgery on his ear, he'll be out 6 weeks, although it won't be definite about the surgery until an exam on Jan. 4th. The injury was from when Elektra slapped him on the pay-per-view. This built into a 6-man tag with Money and Julio De Niro and Chris Hamrick beating Dreamer and Christian York and Joey Matthews when Anderson interfered and laid out Dreamer for Money to pin him after a moonsault. Money has all the ability in the world to be a top guy in this company, but like so many of the good workers, doesn't have the look that the juiced-up guys in the big companies have conditioned the fans to believe what a star wrestler looks like. It's really a sad commentary to recognize that guys who can deliver the goods are being knocked as minor leaguers because they don't use steroids, or if they do, and don't train with weights hard enough or have bad physical genetics. Tajiri and Whipwreck won February 3rd falls from the FBI in another strong match between the two teams. Said not to be as good as their first 2 matches, but better than most of their recent bouts. Tajiri made Mamaluke submit in the 3rd fall, which included a brawl with refs Mike Keckner and heel ref Danny Daniels after a simultaneous pin spot. Said to be the best match on the show. Main event started as Corino defending against Credible with Francine tied to a bull rope to victory. Sandman, who actually has the physical belt, came out to make it a 3-way. Corino took a superplex on guardrail elevated by several chairs. Corino first pinned Credible after the old school expulsion. It got really wild from there. Sandman asked fans to throw chairs, which they did, with chairs flying at the ring all over the place. Corino ended up winning after using the cowbell. Credible came back to cane Corino, but Sandman got the cane and laid both men out, and left with the belt. There were a bunch of fights in the crowd at this point and chairs were being thrown by people who, figuring everyone threw their chairs and nobody got in trouble, that part of being at an ECW show gives you the right to throw your chair. At this point, security wasn't so kind since the spot had already taken place. A fan threw a chair which nailed Credible, who wasn't prepared for it, on the side of the head. Security started attacking 2 fans throwing chairs at this point. At this point, Lynn hasn't received a bona fide offer from the WWF, but the WWF has expressed interest in him, to the degree that in management talking with wrestlers who have worked with him, he got nothing but praise and was actually far higher regarded in that informal polling than Van Dam. Even though there are thoughts that Van Dam has more high card potential, he'll likely remain here until an offer comes. December 23rd Hardcore TV was taped from Queens on December 15th. As a TV show, it was better than average but nothing great. The show opened with the angle which brought the Dudleys back, and of course they got a huge pop cleaning house on Diamond's group. The Was Up spot on Dawn Marie was edited off the show twice. They aired a replay as well, by MSG Network. The Dudleys match never aired. Paul Heyman had talked of editing it and just showing highlights, but didn't even do that. Rhino beat Spike Dudley in 10:05. Rhino threw Spike over the top rope into the crowd. They were probably hoping the crowd would body surf him, but they didn't. Spike juiced. He took incredible punishment and the crowd was really into the match. Unfortunately, he's one of the guys I fear most is going to end up in a wheelchair with the punishment he takes. Rhino pile drove him through a table and got a second pile driver in the ring for the pin. Spike's selling really got people into it. Willie beat Mike Bell in 1:23 of a basic TV squash match. During and Roadkill did an interview, mainly during talking. Roadkill only said one word, and it wasn't chickens. During mainly played up how many dues he paid and the punishment he and Rhino went through breaking in and used the belts to show they've made it, but being sad because his mother passed away before he made it in wrestling. For what it was a very strong promo. Evidently they weren't allowed to air Taz doing basically the same promo for them from the show. They never plugged the Dudleys match to air on TV, but instead plugged the idea of going to the website for photos of the match. FBI beat Whipwreck and Tajiri in 11:12. Styles said that Whipwreck has 17 documented concussions, which is so scary when you think about NFL players having to end their careers having played 15 seasons with half that many. The match wasn't anywhere close to the level of their best matches except Tajiri debuting a few submissions that may have never been seen outside of Mexico. The finish saw Guido use the kiss of death, which used to be called the Maritato, on Tajiri. Sinister Minister did a groin claw using his taped up bad hand and then sniffed it. Heat seemed disappointing compared to Rhino vs Spike, since this was the better match of the two. One thing noticeable in a lot of shows these days is that because shows aren't paced as in every match isn't booked to build on the previous match, and often early matches on the show use so many gimmicks and moves that main eventers have a hard time following. Due to the difference in wrestling audiences that want the big pop now is that good workers late in the card even have difficulty big time popping the crowd. Tajiri did, but only when he played directly to the crowd or did something spectacular. As mentioned last week, the ref held up on the count because the finish was supposed to be that move on a chair and there was no chair, but the wrestlers did it as a finish. It really wasn't noticeable on TV unless you were looking for it. WCW. TV tapings from December 22nd in Memphis. The small crowd was dead most of the way, with Goldberg being the only wrestler to get a good reaction. Steiner got only a decent reaction. Page, Nash, and Sid were also all there, and there was no punishment for anyone for walking out of the tapings or for Steiner for cutting the promo against the script. Bischoff flew to Atlanta on December 21st at the request of Brad Siegel and got everyone to work out their problems. He basically told everyone, or at least they were telling people at the show, that he is going to run the company and that everything was going to be fine again in 2001. Nash, the political animal that he is, walked out with Page, even though he's been notorious about making fun of Page to the Page haters in the company and siding with them because of the feeling that with Bischoff in charge, Page will have influence. Steiner and Page were together at the show and everything is seemingly worked out. Nash even told Mark Madden, when Madden refused to shake Page's hand at TV and Madden explained why he wouldn't because he wouldn't mean it based on what happened, that he should have anyway for that political reason. There was tremendous resentment among many of the wrestlers that people can walk out on tapings or go against the script and not only not get punished, but come back on top. It's been pointed out by many how Luger refused to do an angle, was sent home, and came back in a stronger position, how Bagwell has been in and out of trouble all year, has tremendous heat in the locker room and comes back in a stronger position, how Page left and came back as tag champ let alone Steiner, and how Sting and Booker T will come back in stronger positions while being out with injuries, while guys like Storm and Awesome are out there busting their ass, doing whatever is asked, including Awesome hurting his career with a terrible gimmick, at points were getting over and having good matches, and having no upward push. There were people in management who felt it was necessary to punish several of those from Monday because you can't let walking out on TV go unpunished, but nobody can do that now because of the feeling that Bischoff wouldn't uphold it, and since Page and Nash are going to be close with Bischoff, that anyone insisting on punishment would be the people who would get their own throats cut when Bischoff takes over. They taped a bunch of matches for Worldwide, which will also be used for Nitro overseas. A lot of fans were upset because the ticket stub said Nitro taping and the mats and everything indicated Worldwide instead of Nitro, so fans thought they were ripped off. Local DJ Danger Boy pinned Jimmy Hart in a dark match which was so bad it made the legendary Hart-Mancow feud look like Flair's Steamboat. Hart worked really hard in the market, which is where he lived for so many years, at local promotion, and still, nobody bought tickets. In theory, getting the local top DJs to talk up the event should make it a big deal in town, but this thing isn't working at all. Wright pinned Danny Fackwar. Douglas pinned Smiley. Moore beat Chris Harris in a good match that got no crowd reaction. Chavo Jr. beat Karagias to keep the Cruiserweight title with a brainbuster. Good match. Bigelow pinned Vito clean with no interference. Johnny the Bull came out in a pimp getup and went to hit Bigelow, who moved, and Bigelow threw him into the guardrail. Johnny and Vito then hugged in the ring. Good job of building baby faces. They both look like monkeys in the fans' eyes, and then the fans are supposed to care. They embraced and reformed their forgotten tag team. Harris Twins beat Young Dragons. Dragons carried it to a decent match. Yang challenged Jarrett to a match afterwards, but the Twins held him and Jarrett hit him with a guitar shot. Chronic beat Meng and Kui Wee by pinning Kui Wee. Thunder for presumably Jan. Third opened with Awesome driving the Partridge Family bus, but it's now the Team Canada bus. Flair announced Sid versus Jarrett, and if Sid wins, he gets Jarrett's spot in the three-way at Sin. Helms beat Noble in a good match that got no heat. Karagias jumped Helms and Moore made the save. Chavo then cleaned house on everyone using the title belt. Awesome and Skipper attack and beat up Conan to set up the six-man at Sin between FAs and Team Canada. Palumbo and O'Hare beat Cajun and a wall. All the Thrillers and Douglas jumped direction after the match until Chavo makes the save, running all the heels off with a chair. Meng beat Crowbar in a chair on a pole match. Said to be terrible. Daphne and Paisley were fighting over the chair when Meng used the Tongan death grip for the win. Sets up Crowbar well for his title shot at the next pay-per-view. Goldberg pinned Jindrak quickly. Cat pinned Jones. Said to be really bad. Awesome beat Duggan. Said to be terrible. After the match, Team Canada was beating on Duggan until the FA saved. The FAs ordered the director to get a shot of Awesome's bus, and they vandalized it. Okerlund asked Storm if he's going to call the police. But babyfaces, whoops heels that they are, they refused to call the police and instead want to settle it man-to-man in a 6-man tag on pay-per-view. Sergeant Dwayne Bruce beat Bagwell via DQ when Luger interfered with a chair. Chronic jumped Goldberg when he tried to make the save. They threw Goldberg in a box and had a guy with a forklift carry the box away. Luger put Bruce's arm in a chair and stomped the chair doing the broken arm gimmick. They act as if Bruce was injured. Sid and C. Jarrett. As this was happening, the NBTs were leaving and Page and Nash made their cameo laying them out with crowbars in the parking lot. The man in the mask attacked Sid with help from Jarrett, and it was revealed he was Scott Steiner. And Rick Steiner was in the building. The December 18th Nitro was supposed to practically be built around Rick Steiner as the surprise guy, but he wasn't there because they forgot to tell him, so then he is there on December 22nd, and they never used him once. Instead of letting people know on Jan. 3rd what the pay-per-view main event for Jan. 14th is, they'll wait to Jan. 8th. What a swerve, Scott is the man in the mask and he attacked himself on Nitro. It is announced early on Thunder that Scott Steiner, Nash and Page aren't there, but they all appear. WWF does it all the time, but on WCW, usually when they announce guys aren't going to be there, they don't show up in the final segment. They doubled on Sid until Sid ended up choke slamming both of them, but not sure if the choke slams for his comeback will be on TV. The final thought on Jan. 3rd is that they don't know if Sid or Jarrett are in the pay-per-view main event because they don't know who won. The current plan for the pay-per-view main event is back to being a 4-way with Scott, Rick, Sid, and Jarrett, meaning they'll only have the main event and Rick's involvement on the air 6 days before the show. I guess it really doesn't matter when the buy rates are so low. After walking out on a Nitro taping on December 18th, Sid was apparently begged to return, although nobody knows what booking promises were made to get him back. The Jan. 8th Nitro in St. Paul at the new XL Energy Center, which had a lot of local promo work done last week by Steiner, has sold about 2,500 tickets. The Jan. 14th pay-per-view in Indianapolis has already sold 3,000 tickets with virtually no matches announced. They are breathing a sigh of relief that the advance is strong by current standards because it's going to be hard to sell a lot of tickets over the next few weeks with all the TV preemptions. Tom Zenk, who is making a second career as a guest on wrestling radio shows, categorized the WCW sale to Bischoff as a fire sale to the arsonist, asking if it's okay for Time Warner to sell the company at a depressed price to the guy who made the company so unprofitable in the first place. Page's face was all puffy when he showed up in Memphis from the fight. Bagwell plea bargain based on the May 9th incident in Springfield, Illinois, where he punched one of the backstage employees. Judge John Malick ordered Bagwell to pay a $500 fine, be placed on probation for 1 year and perform 20 hours of community service work at local children's hospitals. The incident occurred when some of the workers were breaking down the ring and trying to take it through a door, and Bagwell, Elizabeth and Lex Luger were blocking the door. When Bagwell was asked to move, an argument ensued and he allegedly punched 35-year-old Daryl Miller, who was carrying carpet to the back. WCW suspended Bagwell for 30 days after the incident, costing him approximately $45,000. David Flair, Mark Jindrak, Sean O'Hare and Young Dragons all worked the December 23rd NWA Wildside show in Cornelia, Georgia, although it was said that Air Paris vs. AJ Styles in the main event stole the show with a Japanese-style match. Promoter Bill Behrens at the show said he had talked with Terry Taylor about bringing in 3 Count, Stasiak and Palumo and Noble and Karagias. WCW lost its strongest TV outlet in the UK, which was its prime outlet in its 2 successful tours, the worldwide show that aired every Friday night at 7 p.m. on Channel 5, which is equivalent to primetime network coverage in the US. The station replaced the show with Battledome. WCW still has Nitro on the cable Bravo channel on Thursdays at 10 p.m. Chris Harris may be getting a small push based on his appearance in a country video that has gotten some play on CMT. They can't push the video too hard since Lawler also has a prominent role in a video by artist Clay Davidson. In a Miami Herald TV preview of Nitro, one of the characters listed is General Erection. December 22nd TV taping in Memphis drew 2,547 in the building, which was 1,329 paying $29,045. WWF had Raw on December 11th in the same city, drawing about 14,000 paid. WWF. Early estimates have Armageddon doing about a 1.15 buy rate. Current estimate is 465,000 buys, which is about a $5.99 million company gross. Those numbers are up a little from the previous show. It's a better number that I'd have expected it, and probably has to be chalked up to the job they did selling the Hell in a Cell as a concept, and given how well it was executed and followed up on, it probably means that next year the match should also do a strong number. Brian James, Road Dogg, was sent home on December 19th before the tapings in Charlotte and has been suspended indefinitely without any further pay other than the pay he's already earned, such as pay-per-view money coming in for the next few months or merchandise money, since pay-per-view payoffs come a few months after the event and pay for the group of house shows he's already worked. There are no plans at this point of bringing him back. He showed up in bad shape the day before, and the match with K-Quick against Lowdown for Metal/Jacked was said to have been an embarrassment. The feeling was in the condition he was in, they were putting talent at risk working with him. The issues are said to be far more complex, and the feeling is he has to straighten his life out first before addressing the question of his possibly returning. James has already been through rehab a couple of times. Want to know the difference between WWF and WCW, other than this being addressed before there are embarrassing arrests rather than after a string of them, is that somehow I don't think X-Pac or Triple H are going on live TV over the next few weeks doing his catchphrases and encouraging fans to think the company is stupid for not giving him a second chance. The actual pay-per-view numbers, as opposed to the estimated numbers that we get usually about a week after the event that usually are close, are that the September pay-per-view ended up at 625,000 buys, October ended up at 500,000, Survivor Series was down to 400,000, which was a disappointment. At this point Armageddon will end up above projections. I believe they project in the range of 400,000 buys for a non-big name pay-per-view and more than that for the big ones with traditional names, although as this year has shown, WrestleMania and Royal Rumble as names mean something, but the rest of the shows draw based on the main event and not the name or history of the show. Survivor Series, based on the company's budgetary projections, created an economic shortfall, but that is more than taken care of by how much the September and October shows did over projections at this point, and no Rumble card is finalized. I'm guessing that they will go with Edge and Christian versus Dudley's for the tag title, that is pretty likely, and Angle defending against either Rock or Austin, more likely Austin. There has been Benoit versus Jeff Hardy talk, but they already had Benoit beat him clean with the crossface on TV last week. Not that in this day and age it kills the match or anything, but it is something they'd have avoided doing if that was the direction they were going, but there is a sense people are interested in that match. Raw, taped on December 22nd in Chattanooga for Christmas night, was a decent show. Crowd heat overall was below usual, although it was strong for when the big names came out for entrances, but even Rock vs. Undertaker inside the ring didn't get much heat. It opened with Stephanie doing the 15 minutes opening segment. She said she baked her mom a fruitcake since that symbolized what she is for Christmas. Edge and Christian and Angle were brought out. Angle brought out various members of his family, a cousin and several brothers, claiming there were 14 All-American honors, 11 national titles and 16 state titles between them, including older brother Eric, who should be starting soon in OVW. They sang Winder Wonderland badly before Jericho interrupted and challenged Angle for the title. Stephanie turned down the request, being that he had insulted her, and said instead he could have a 6-man tag, and Jericho chose Dudley's as his partners. Hardys beat Benoit and Malenko. Matt told Lita to stay in the back, but she came out anyway. Good match, with Lita giving Malenko a low blow and Matt pinning him with a leg drop off the top. After the match, Dean put Jeff in the cloverleaf while Benoit put Lita in the crossface. They sold the crossface good, like Lita had been injured. Matt was mad at Lita for coming out even though she was hurt, and Matt and Benoit ended up brawling backstage. Deborah said she missed Mick Foley and that her job wasn't fun anymore. They pretended Vince wasn't there because he was helping at a soup kitchen in Greenwich, Connecticut, with them making the point that there isn't a homeless problem in Greenwich, but on the phone with Stephanie, we could hear that Vince was actually with Stratus, and then hung up on Stephanie when we could hear her voice. In a three-way for the Hardcore title, Blackman retained over Raven, and Hardcore Holly by suplexing and pinning Holly outside in 9-degree weather on a car. Can you imagine going outside with no shirt in 9-degree weather? When Blackman came back in, Raven hit him with a 2x4 and pinned him to get the title. They brought up the 24-7 rule being in effect, but that it hasn't been used because nobody had the guts to attack Blackman outside of a wrestling ring. Well, at least they tried to make it logical. Regal did an interview talking about belching and farting before the Austin vs. Kane match. Austin was a little slower, but it was a decent brawl before Regal interfered for the DQ. Austin cleaned house on both men with chair shots. Kat came out and gave Ross a Christmas present of a WWF Divas video, and then undid her robe, showing very skimpy negligee to Lawler. Angle was backstage with his brothers saying that cousin Jimmy ruined the singing according to Mom and that he was the best singer in the group. Too Cool beat Tanda. Match had little heat except for the worm on Albert. GMS pinned Test after Stephanie distracted him. After the match, Albert told Stephanie if she needs anything, come to him. ENC and Angle beat Jericho and Dudley's. Finish saw Dudley's put Eric Angle through a table and ENC and Dudley's brawled on a ramp. Jericho went for the lionsault on Angle, who got his knees up and scored a clean pin on Jericho with the Olympic Slam. At least they are making an attempt to portray Angle as a strong champ going into some pay-per-view main events. The Angles held Jericho and Kurt attacked him till Dudley's made the save. Buchanan did an interview ripping on the internet to set up Buchanan and Goodfather over acolytes when Buchanan pinned Bradshaw after Venus gave him a DDT and Buchanan gave him an axe kick in a short match with little heat. They did a taped Chyna interview, claiming she had 3 ruptured discs and her career was over. This is to build sympathy for a big marketing push for her in mid-January with her book coming out. I just pray when they bring her back, they don't start having her wrestling men again. Rock did an interview singing Santa Claus is Coming to Town, but using himself as Santa. Maine saw Rock over Undertaker via DQ. Not much heat for the match until the near falls. Taker's selling was really bad. He did a choke slam on Rock but Rikishi was out so no pin. Rock then went for the people's elbow, but Rikishi pulled down the ropes and Rock tumbled over and the show ended up with Rikishi laying both men out. SmackDown tapings were on December 23rd in Nashville, which included taping for the New Year's Eve Heat show. Only thing notable for Heat is that after Taz beat Taka Michinoku, they did one of those overdubbed interviews, but this time it was Taz talking with overdubbing in Japanese. For SmackDown, ENC beat Jericho when Stephanie distracted Jericho. After the match, Jericho was beaten down again for Stephanie to slap him. Benoit beat Matt Hardy to keep the IC title with the crossface, in what was said to be the best match on the show. Angle beat Bubba Ray Dudley when ENC interfered. Angle put Bubba through a table with the Olympic Slam in their attempt to make him a stronger champion. Devon was involved by the end. Got the feeling with Dudley's on the short end of things so often that a tag title is in their future. Stephanie did an interview which ended with Austin wanting a title shot at Angle and pouring beer all over her. Crowd went wild for this. Raven beat Jeff Hardy with a DDT to keep the hardcore title in what was said to be a good match. Venus and Ivory did an interview spoofing the Ross and Chyna interview from Raw. Buchanan and Goodfather and Ivory beat Acolytes and Jackie when Ivory pinned Jackie. Venus and Gunn did run-ins. About 2 minutes later, Jackie came out and challenged Ivory to a rematch and they did a 30-second match doing the same finish and run-ins, so probably they didn't like how it turned out the first time and will splice it all together into one segment. Tanda beat Too Cool when Test gave GMS the flying elbow and Albert pinned him. Albert then attacked Test, splitting up their team which takes Stratus out of the act for the Vince deal. Albert was attacking Test under orders of Stephanie. There was a huge fight in the crowd at this point which caused about a 10-minute delay. Main event saw Rock and Undertaker over Regal and Rikishi and Kane when Rock pinned Regal. Match said to be not that good. About 10 members of the Tennessee Titans were at ringside, including Kenny Holmes, who was Rock's college roommate. Rock brought them all into the ring after the TV cameras were turned off to do a show-closing ending. Crowd was really into Rock when he talked about living in Nashville and mentioning a local high school. Rocky Johnson worked the territory for the last time around 1987. WWF has officially sold its Las Vegas property, the former Debbie Reynolds Hotel, for $11.2 million. The original plan was to make it a WWF-themed hotel, including putting a TV studio and small arena in the hotel. They quickly realized it was a bad bet, dropped plans for opening the place, and put it for sale. There had been at least some talk of interest in bringing Heenan in to do commentary on one of the less high-profile shows, maybe working 1 day a week, but the talk seems to have died in recent weeks. Larry Whistler, Zbyszko, will be getting an announcing audition. He has also talked about a possible role as an on-screen character including pitching for the open commissioner role, although I don't know if it is being seriously considered. Dwayne Johnson is not going to be announcing the Orange Bowl parade on Jan. 3rd after all for PactionNet. The original plan was for him to work with Nancy O'Dell of Access Hollywood, and the idea was working with her would give him a lot of pub on the show. When she pulled out, the names they gave to replace her weren't as big, combined with the fact they were more unknown. WWF is very protective right now of Johnson looking good in any non-wrestling things he does to not ruin the aura, and the fear was that doing color on a parade is something he's never done, and they didn't want to risk putting him in a situation with an unknown host that they didn't know would work well with him. When he pulled out, the Orange Bowl canceled him going out with the Williams sisters of tennis fame to do the opening coin toss. WWF has many people doubled up in offices at Titan Towers as they've outgrown the facility, which is why they are looking at either constructing a new building or purchasing an existing office in the area. Davey Boy Smith, having had charges dropped on December 7th for alleged death threats against Ellie Hart Neidhart and soon-to-be ex-wife Diana Hart Smith on the agreement he agreed to stay away from several members of the Hart family, faced yet another hearing on December 22nd for allegedly making threats toward Bruce Hart on December 10th. Smith pleaded not guilty. Bruce Hart's wife, Andrea, is now living with Smith. Smith, claiming he's clean from drugs and has been since July in a Calgary Sun article this week, is now saying that he wants to open a wrestling school. The Sun article stated that Smith is no longer with the WWF. In the Canadian press, Smith was quoted as saying, "I was involved in that Hart family for 20 years, and I'm sad to say it was the worst 20 years I ever had," claiming it was a family filled with jealousy. Bret Hart, who has almost totally disappeared from the limelight over the past few weeks to devote his time to writing a book, said, "If it wasn't for my family and the opportunities my father gave him, Davey would still be working in the Wigan mines." He's talking about a dysfunctional family at the same time he has taken off with my brother Bruce's wife. "You're right in the thick of it, buddy." As of December 18th, Smith was still under contract to WWF but being suspended without pay, so I'm not sure one way or the other if he's been officially fired, although the odds were strong that he would never be brought back. While there is no definite timetable on Triple H, he is tentatively expected to start wrestling at the Jan. 8th San Jose taping. Some Ross Report notes for the week. Undertaker had a bad stomach virus but still worked the match where he dropped the tag team titles on SmackDown on December 19th. Jericho will skate in a celebrity hockey game on Jan. 7th in Madison Square Garden. Snow's return is considered a day-to-day thing with his wrist injury. Dennis Knight Midian is being given a new role and doing tryout matches with his new gimmick, said to be something along with lines of a Dusty Rhodes. Matt Hardy's injury was actually a severely bruised collarbone. Grandmaster Sexay missed last week's TV because his father-in-law was in a serious auto accident on December 18th. Tori has been cleared to return to the ring. The China cover of Playboy sold more than 1 million copies. The Sable cover issue sold 800,000. So I guess that tells you there are going to be a lot more WWF women on the cover of that magazine if China can pull off numbers like that. That proves when it comes to selling magazines it's not the woman, but the marketing of the woman, but I guess that is obvious in any marketing situation that it isn't the product itself, but how well the product is sold to the consumers that determines success. China's autobiography, called If They Only Knew, hits the streets on Jan. 29th, which means guaranteed a monster push for China once again starting now. Just hope they don't make her world champion to push the book. Actually, right now, there don't appear to be any plans to go anywhere near that direction. X-Pac is expected back either slightly before the Rumble or at the Rumble. Lita has a bulging disc in her lower back. She's toned down all the high-flying at least for a few weeks and will probably be kept more out of the ring. Triple H will be kept out of action a few more weeks. Guerrero will be back probably on the first TVs of the new year. Gangrel has a bulging disc in his neck and is looking for a late January return. The Gangrel and Tom Howard tag team idea was dropped largely because Howard didn't want to work full-time in Memphis. Howard, who is the head instructor for UPW, isn't sure at this stage of his life whether he wants to make the kind of commitment necessary for a WWF spot and all the travel. David Nelson, who had worked in OVW, was dropped. Jan. 8th Raw in San Jose and Jan. 16th SmackDown in Chicago are both sold out. Angle will be inducted into the U.S. Amateur Wrestling Hall of Fame in Stillwater, Oklahoma in June. Angle joins a very select group of pro wrestling major stars in the Amateur Hall, consisting of Danny Hodge, Dick Hutton and Earl McCready, as well as lesser-known pro wrestlers from the 20s and 30s like Pete Maringer, Bobby Pierce, Robin Reed, Jack Van Beber, and Russell Viss. To show how select the group of wrestlers involved in the Hall of Fame are, even amateur greats that went into pro wrestling like Vern Gagne, Leroy McGurk, Wayne Martin, Dale Lewis, Joe Scarpello and Jack Briscoe aren't inducted. UFC announcer Jeff Blatnick was inducted in 1999. Romeo Bliss, losing to Raven, Shank, losing to Essa Rios and Joey Abs, and Stone Mountain and Damien of OVW, losing to Rodney and Pete Gass, worked WWF tapings last week from the NWA Wildside promotion. More regarding Nelson. He may have the freakiest physique of them all, even more than Scott Steiner, and was a great athlete as far as being agile for a 320-pound man. He seemed to have an attitude problem in OVW, so he was sent to Memphis, figuring that a change of setting and an entirely new group of faces may work to his favor, but it didn't. Personally, I think WCW may want to take a look at him, and even more so, New Japan. He's much larger and far more athletic and has far more potential as a worker than Scott Norton, but then again, except for larger, pretty much everyone fits into the latter two categories. Okay, he's already as good as Brian Johnston. The thing that works against him is he's 36 years old, but doesn't look it, and the fact he failed in both OVW and Memphis because of a perceived attitude problem doesn't work for him either. In the latest Sports Rec video charts, Rock, the People's Champ at number 3, was the highest pro wrestling video, trailing the World Series and Tony Hawk. WWF occupied spots 2 through 10 with Rock, Tables, Ladders, and Chairs, Eve of Destruction, most memorable matches of 2000, Jericho, Angle, Beavis, and Austin. ECW had tapes at number 10 and number 12, while the FMW tape is at number 16. Nothing much to the People magazine article on Rock as the 25 most intriguing people of the year. They listed Johnson's earnings for this year at $15 million. While I'm sure he made many million, somehow that number sounds like it probably should be divided in half. If he gets 2 movie starring roles in 2001, and already has one, and he and business stay as hot next year, there's a chance he could approach a figure like that. Michelle Malkin wrote a column in the New York Post on December 21 regarding the WWF lawsuit against the PTC. The column was basically anti-WWF, calling it a ranting lawsuit. There was no new ground broken in the story, which did mention several of the murder cases, including the one in Florida that was part of the lawsuit, and tying them to pro wrestling. On the Memphis TV show that aired on December 23, taped on December 16, they aired Christmas videos from Foley, Rock, Triple H, Harry, Deborah, Kat, Jackie, Raven, Edge, Jim Ross, and even Downtown Bruno, Harvey Whippleman in WWF. They were building up a show on Jan. 13th called Corinth Chaos, headlined by Too Cool vs. Mean Street Posse. WWF had 8 of the top 10 videos this week in the Rec Sports chart, with Rock moving to number 2 behind the World Series. It'll Never Be Over department. On Metal/Jacked, in a Royal Rumble moment, they showed Undertaker throwing Bret Hart out in a clip where Hart looked bad. You can always tell what role Stephanie is going to play by her hair. The more the curl, the more of a strong heel roll. When it's blow-dried straight, she's a sympathetic babyface. On the Christmas Night Raw, for example, it was straight with a little bit of curl for her heel spots, but straighter than usual since she was the babyface in a sense in the storyline of her father being with Stratus. BJ Payne of OVW was signed to a 1-year developmental deal. Jim Cornette had been pushing for that for some time, as Payne is one of the younger wrestlers he's been featuring. SmackDown tapings December 19 in Charlotte drew 12,217, paying $386,006. Raw tapings on December 22 in Chattanooga drew 7,223, about 200 shy of capacity, paying $168,731. SmackDown tapings on December 23 in Nashville drew 10,805, about 1,100 shy of capacity, paying $335,685. Merchandise per caps were down even though it was just before Christmas, with merchandise for the 3 shows at $205,786, which is $6.80 per head. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,